and the fire was ahead of me, and I got trapped, and the question was, what do I do? And it was incredibly frightening. Imagine you're at the corner and there's a big fire ahead of you, and it was like the self-control problem. What do I do? Do I run through it, or do I wait? And if I wait, does it get worse? And it did get worse, and it got worse and worse, and eventually I had to run through it. And I can't be sure, but I think that in the beginning it was just the top of my body that got burned, and then I got the bottom part burned as well. But there was a moment when I had to decide that, I cannot get trapped there for a very long time, and I have to make a decision, and I need to make it fast. There was one other incident I remember. I just finished training for first aid, and when the paramedics came, they gave me an airway. This was a piece of plastic that held my tongue down and helped me breathe. And when I got to hospital, they submerged me in a bath because most of my burns were due to magnesium. And magnesium, if it's exposed to oxygen, can reburn again. So the fear was there were still parts of magnesium in me, and if they would get exposed, they would kind of burst into flame again. So they submerged me underwater and tried to pick all the... And one of the nurses was trying to get the airway out of my mouth, and I kind of refused to let her take it out. And she said, okay, relax, I'll take it out, I'll listen to you, and then I'll put it back if you want to, just so you can talk, because of course I couldn't talk with it. And she took it out, and she said, why don't you want to let me take the airway out? And I said, I just learned that you have to have this airway if you don't want to lose consciousness and swallow your tongue. And she said, fine, and she gave it back to me. We became good friends for many years later. But for me, this was kind of a part of the process. I was always trying to, I think, kind of be in control and figure out what was happening, and stay conscious and monitor everything, and all the beeps from all the instrument, and what was going on, and what was my blood. I was quite annoying for the physicians, I must say.
Wasn't there a moment during these years of agony that you just wanted to let go?
Yeah, actually quite a lot. It's kind of interesting. In the beginning, I was just dealing with pain. Melzak, a very famous pain researcher, said that people become pain people. Like, you can't think of anything else. When you have such tremendous pain, it's very hard to get the capacity of thought to think about anything else. So I just thought about pain. It was actually when I was getting better that I was getting quite depressed. And I'm sure all of you had some burns at some point. And my thoughts was, okay, this was just like the burns I had before. You get a burn, and a few weeks later it goes away. I didn't understand the substantial difference between deep burns and shallow burns. And by the way, it's still a mystery. Think about it. None of these cells on my body, all of these cells are different. These were not the cells I had when I was 18. They've changed many, many times. How come they are regrowing as scars, right? Shouldn't they grow up as, where's the DNA structure that gets them to remember scar and grow as scars? I mean, it's a really very strange process. So anyway, so when I was in tremendous pain, I was mostly about tremendous pain. And then when I was getting better, something really awful happened. It was enough for me to sit like this for a couple of hours, like going to see a movie, and then I couldn't straighten my hand. It was basically the skin would shrink so fast. The scars were just starting to heal, and the skin would shrink so fast that I had to really tear against the skin. You know how the kids do kind of Indian burn to each other? I had to really do this to myself for a very long time. I think for every minute I would sit, I would have to spend about a minute trying to stretch the skin. And I still have some of these problems. I still can't stretch it all the way, and it's still kind of a very rough skin. And that was a very depressing part of my life, because I was feeling I was getting better. Things were, the scars were healing. There were no open wounds anymore, no fear of infection. And all of a sudden, my body was kind of betraying me in this incredibly deep way, fighting back.
And you remember the first time you saw yourself in the mirror? Was that a decision, by the way?
Yeah, I begged the nurses to let me walk to the mirror for a long time. So I couldn't walk for a long time. There was no issue. And then when I started practicing walking a couple of steps, I asked, where there's the next mirror? And I could see my body. I could see my hands laying in bed. I couldn't see my face, of course. And walking to this, first of all, it took a very long time, you know, maybe 20 or 30 meters, but the difficult thing was that it didn't look anything like me. Kind of, I still remember that image, which was very strange. I felt like one eye, the left eye, was recognized, the right eye not so much because there's too much stuff on top of it. And it really felt like it was almost a Play-Doh cover on myself. That like there was one eye inside of it that I could recognize was me, and the rest of it had an outside layer that just didn't belong.
Did you have to force yourself keep watching?
I did. No, I was fascinated. I had to force myself because the pain started. Everything was painful, so I wanted to go back to bed. It really looked like watching an alien. It didn't really feel real in any way.
You know, they say that women can take pain better than men, but I understand that empirical data proves otherwise.
Well, they say that. I think it's mostly women who say it.
Just because we give, just because we give birth.
Yeah, the argument.
The funny story is about the women who try to prove you that.
So I studied psychology in Tel Aviv University, and one of our professors told us this story that women can give birth. And at that time, I was doing research on pain. My interest into human behavior came through interest in pain perception, how people feel pain, how you remove bandages from burn patient, how do you make the pain less.
And she was a female professor.
She was a female professor. She said this. I said, hey, we have a lab. We have an equipment to give people pain. Let's just test it out. So together with a friend, we created a little experiment. We had a bucket with ice water. We asked people to put their hands in it and see how long they could survive. And I came back to class and started the class. I was so excited. I said, hey, we did this experiment. We found that men can sustain cold water for much longer than women. Men have higher pain threshold than women. And without losing a beat, this professor said that the only thing I proved was that men were idiots.
And
she said this was pain with no particular goal. If there was a goal to the pain, then you would see what women are capable of.
And the real conclusion that you draw for it is how far people will go to prove that they are right.
That's right.
What is, Dan, lastly, what is the most irrational decision you ever made?
The most irrational decision I've ever made. There's so many to choose from.
You know what? The one that you're most proud of.
Oh, the one I'm most proud of. So this is a long-term decision. But when I was in hospital, there were a group of people that became kind of life handicaps. People who, as I was almost for 3 years in hospital and in Tel HaShomer, and there was a culture of talking to each other and going for lunch together and going to the occupational therapy and becoming friends. And it was really easy to stay friends with only people with injuries. First of all, we had something in common, and we had a common language, we had common problems. But the discussions always became about, so some of the discussion was medical, but some of it became about kind of life as being handicapped. And I'm not sure exactly what caused it, but I never felt comfortable in that group, and I never wanted to be that, and I did my best not to get sucked into it. And I think it's one of those things that if I would have get sucked into it, and some of those people were very nice and interesting, I think my life would have ended very differently. So the decision I've made, kind of not to join that group, which was difficult socially at the time, I think was painful. Because, if you're handicapped and you look different, and in the beginning I looked much more different than I look now. I had these masks and all kinds of contraptions and so on, and going to Tel Aviv University with all those things where everybody else looks so beautiful, all the women are sitting on the grass and it's a very nice atmosphere, and I couldn't participate in all this. This path of life was very challenging, but I'm very happy I took it.
And you're now married and the father of 2.
Yep.
And I thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank
תודה
you.
רבה.